Chapter 1. The Manor of Ash was less a structure of stone and mortar and more a monument to a grief that had outlived empires. Its skeletal roof clawed at a sky perpetually the color of old bruised linen, and its windows, blind and dust-coated, watched the sprawling, dead landscape with the patience of true despair. Lord Lucian Vane, the last of his cursed line, sat in the heart of this sepulchre, a creature carved from the darkest marble and gilded by an antiquity he despised. 2 centuries had passed since he swore his last, pointless oath, and now the crushing weight of his immortality was merely the absence of sound, the stillness in his own chest. His vigil was a penance, the slow decay of his soul, his only company. The cold was a physical thing here, an ever-present biting mistress that wrapped around the unliving like a shroud, yet for all its reach it could not extinguish the small, furious ember of guilt that burned behind his unnaturally pale eyes. He was a king who reigned over dust and regret, his power a lonely, magnificent burden. He was reviewing the brittle, covenant-bound scrolls, an arcane map detailing the last known refuges of the old blood, when the silence was shattered, not by the expected shriek of a Sunder Witch or the thunderous footfall of a golem guard, but by a persistent, remarkably insistent tap-tap-tap against the thick, leaded glass of his study window. The sound was an anomaly, a tiny, defiant heartbeat in the vast, echoing silence of his existence. He did not move, his perfect porcelain features remaining utterly impassive. He merely held the parchment taut between 2 fingers, the ancient script blurring. No sane, living thing approached the Manor of Ash, and nothing insane would possess the precision to knock so neatly. The tapping came again, louder this time, accompanied by a sound so alien to this fortress of sorrow that it arrested his ancient heart, the soft, determined scrape of a child's small boot on the frozen sill. Lucian's stillness intensified, becoming predatory. He was a creature designed for high-stakes drama, for sieges and betrayals, not for this domestic, baffling intrusion. He finally raised his head, the movement liquid and impossibly swift, his eyes, the color of polished amethyst in the meager candlelight, focusing on the window. A small girl, perhaps 10 years old, stood on the ledge outside, bundled in a threadbare patched coat too large for her tiny frame. Her hair was a wild, dark tangle, and her face, smudged with what might have been dirt or old soot, was fixed in an expression of intense, unwavering purpose. She held out a small, trembling hand, not in supplication, but presenting a single, crumpled $50 bill. Modern currency, utterly worthless to him, a relic from the fleeting, fragile world of mortals. Her eyes, wide and startlingly green, met his, and in their depth he saw not fear, but a weary, desperate conviction that mirrored the ancient burden Isaïs, his own. This was not a lost child. This was a petitioner. Chapter 2. Lucian, moving with the preternatural grace that always unnerved the few mortals who dared cross his path, was at the window in a single, soundless glide. The leaded latch, sealed by centuries of disuse and arcane chill, yielded instantly to the pressure of his fingers, his touch leaving a brief, visible frost on the brass. The window swung inward, admitting a rush of air that smelled sharply of pine needles, wet soil, and the faint, sweet scent of newly spilled blood, a scent he catalogued and dismissed with practiced discipline. The small figure did not flinch from the sudden, imposing presence of the vampire king, whose height and stark, inhuman beauty were often enough to send armed men fleeing. She merely adjusted her grip on the crumpled note. "I am not lost," she stated, her voice a reedy whisper, but surprisingly firm, devoid of the expected childish tremor. "I know who you are. They call you the King of Sighs, the one who grants impossible debts." Lucian allowed a single, slow blink, an expression that, for him, conveyed utter astonishment. This child spoke in the lexicon of the forgotten, of old, dark contracts made in the blood and mist of the early ages. You trespass on my solitude, mortal. Lucian's voice was a deep, resonant rumble, an intimate sound that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the room. It was formal, a warning encased in velvet. And you present me with paper that holds no value to my kind. Explain your folly before I decide to keep the debt for myself. He did not specify the nature of that debt, but the implication hung heavy and cold in the air. The girl, however, did not recoil from the threat. Instead, she took a steadying, visible breath, clutching the $50 note as if it were an anchor in a rising tide. "It is not for the value," she countered, her green eyes fiercely protective. "It is for the formality. My father always said a contract must begin with an offering, even a token one. This is my offering, King Vane." She finally extended her hand fully, the $50 bill fluttering like a trapped moth. Lucian's gaze dropped to the small, grimy hand, then back to her resolute face. He noted the fine, almost invisible scarring around her hairline, the kind of subtle signature left by powerful, uncontrolled magic. This girl was not merely human, she carried a sleeping power, a potential he had not encountered in centuries. This changed the equation entirely, shifting the interaction from a trivial annoyance to a high-stakes encounter. His predatory stillness sharpened, but it was now a stillness born of caution, not hunger. "And what?" Lucian pressed, leaning closer, his shadow falling over her like a heavy, suffocating mantle. "Does a child such as yourself require from a king who deals only in oblivion and ancient promises?" He was testing her resolve, using the full, terrifying force of his presence. He expected a request for gold, or protection from petty thugs, or perhaps even a plea for mercy for a loved one. The answer she gave him was utterly unexpected, stripping the formality from the moment and driving straight into the core of his own personal agony. Chapter 3. The child, whose name he still did not know, held his gaze, the overwhelming chill of his proximity failing to break her composure. Her small body seemed to gather itself, drawing on a hidden reservoir of fierce adult conviction. "I require an anchor," she stated, the word a soft echo in the vast echoing space of the room. "My mother, she is forgetting how to stay. The darkness is taking her memory, the light, everything that makes her her. The priests say it is a shadow rot, a curse, a slow decay of the soul for daring to know too much. They say it is irreversible. But you, King Vane, you are an expert in lingering, in being an anchor when everything else has turned to ash. I want you to make her an oath." Lucian felt a profound, unnerving jolt, not of fear, but of an old, suppressed empathy. The word anchor resonated in the deep, melancholic chambers of his existence. He was the anchor of his own cursed lineage, bound to this miserable, dust-choked land by an oath of protective mercy he had long wished to shed. He understood the terrible necessity of remaining fixed when the currents of time and decay demanded dissolution. He looked at the child, really seeing her now. The sheer, raw loneliness in her posture, the silent, driving guilt that fueled her impossible quest. It mirrored his own. "An oath is blood, child," he murmured, the Gothic poetry of his language returning, laden with the weight of history and power. "It is a price far exceeding this worthless $50. An oath from the old blood cannot be broken. It will bind you and your mother and me to a shared fate until the end of all things. Are you prepared to pay the true, unseen price of that permanence?" He spoke not to frighten her, but to make her understand the terrifying, binding nature of his kind's promises. His magic, his ancient strength, was not a trinket to be bought with petty cash. It was a force that warped reality and demanded commensurate sacrifice. The girl nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "I will pay whatever is required. The moment you secure her memory, her presence, I will give you anything you ask. My future, my name, my loyalty, anything. But first, she added, her small voice tightening with an intimate tension, you must tell me the nature of the oath. What exactly will you promise? Lucian considered her, his mind a whirlwind of ancient politics and prophecy. This shadow rot was familiar. It was the slow, deliberate work of the unmaking coven, ancient enemies of his house, who preyed upon the powerful by stripping them of their history and conviction. A direct confrontation would be a high-stakes escalation, drawing the enemy to the supposed sanctuary of the Manor of Ash. Yet the quiet hope and fierce protection in this child's eyes were a pull he had not felt in 2 centuries. It was the echo of a forgotten purpose. He closed his amethyst eyes for a long, silent moment, the world outside the manor shrinking down to the sound of the wind and the focused, desperate breathing of the small girl before him. When he opened his eyes, the decision was made, the dramatic turn inevitable. My oath, Lucian announced, his tone shifting from formal warning to a declaration of immense protective intent, will be this. I shall be her anchor in the world. I will bind her memory to my own immortal one. And the moment the unmaking coven seeks to claim her, they will find not a frail mortal, but a king of the old blood standing between them and their prize. But this $50, he added, glancing down at the crumpled note, is merely a loan, a token of trust. The true debt will be that you must remember the cost of my protection, always. You must remember that you chose this. Chapter 4. The pact was sealed not with elaborate ritual, but with a sparse, purposeful simplicity that spoke volumes of the high-stakes gravity involved. Lucian did not touch the modern currency again. It lay, a pathetic little flag of the fleeting human world, on the cold marble floor. Instead, he made the girl speak her name, Ilara. It was a good, strong name, one that resonated with the promise of conviction. Then, with a silent, commanding gesture, he ushered her into the cavernous, dust-shrouded hall. She was not afraid of the shadows, nor of the unsettling quiet, nor of the immense Gothic scale of his lonely home. She moved with a practiced wariness, like a seasoned traveler who knew the terrain of sorrow. Lucian, cloaked in his unnerving stillness, led her through the echoing marble corridors, his mind already dissecting the logistics of the coming conflict. Binding a human soul and memory to an immortal one was an act of profound, world-altering magic, a breach of ancient, self-imposed isolation. It would paint a target on both Ilara and the manor, drawing the attention of every supernatural entity that feared the revival of the old blood's protective mercy. But the act itself, the breaking of the long, silent vigil, brought with it a quiet, terrifying thrill. He was acting again, not merely observing the slow passage of time. They stopped before a tall, arched door made of dense, unblemished oak, banded in iron etched with forgotten sigils of warding. The air here was subtly different, less cold and faintly scented with dried lavender and the clean, metallic tang of iron-rich blood. The life force that, even in its corrupted state, clung stubbornly to a purpose. She is here, Lucian stated, his voice dropping to a near whisper, the intimate tone reserved only for high-stakes vulnerability, protected for now by the remnants of my own house's dying magic. Once I bind her, that frail protection will shatter, replaced by the sheer, unyielding force of my immortality. She will become a beacon, Ilara. Are you prepared for the siege that will follow? Ilara placed a hand, small and fierce, upon the iron-banded wood. Her green eyes, meeting his in the dim candlelight, held no ambiguity. I am prepared to stand with my anchor, she simply said. Her choice, so simple and absolute, was a mirror to his own forgotten conviction. It was the purity of intent that separated the powerful from the merely strong. Lucian extended his hand, not to touch her, but to summon the necessary ritual implements. From the deepest shadows of the hall, a small, silver stiletto, ancient and curved, appeared, floating soundlessly to rest in his palm. He also called forth a heavy, velvet-bound tome, the Codex Anima, a grimoire containing the forbidden oaths of his house. He opened it to a page already marked by the faint copper scent of centuries-old dried blood. He did not ask permission. His finger traced a line of incandescent arcane script on the page, the formal declaration of the Anchor Oath. The words were a low, powerful drone in the dead silence of the hall. He cut the palm of his hand with the silver stiletto. The blood that welled up was not the thin, mortal crimson, but a thick, nearly black substance, rich with the power of his ancient race. It did not drip, but hung, suspended on his marble-smooth skin. "You must bring your mother to me now, Alara," Lucian instructed, his voice steady, yet charged with immense concentrated power. "The act must be done quickly, before the binding magic dissipates. Stand back and watch the cost of my promise." The siege had begun, not outside in the ash-choked forests, but here, in the cold, dramatic intimacy of the manor's oldest halls. Chapter 5. Alara opened the heavy oak door with an effort that revealed the tense, focused tremor in her small frame. The chamber within was small, surprisingly warm, and dimly lit by a single, carefully trimmed oil lamp. A woman lay on a simple, low cot, her mother. She was beautiful in a faded, fragile way, her face serene, yet hollowed by an invisible exhaustion. Her eyes were open, but vacant, focused on a reality that was rapidly dissolving, lost in the self-inflicted exile of the shadow rot. She was forgetting how to stay. "Mother," Alara whispered, the fierce protectiveness in her tone turning suddenly intimate and heartbreakingly gentle. She helped the woman rise, guiding her fragile steps toward the imposing, still figure of the vampire king. Lucian stood in the arched doorway, framed by the Gothic severity of the hall, his presence now less a threat and more a terrifying, beautiful sanctuary. The air around him shimmered with the gathering force of the Anchor Oath. Alara's mother did not see Lucian. Her gaze drifted past him, past the shadows and the cold marble, focused on the vast empty canvas of her dissolving memory. When Alara placed her mother's hand, cool and delicate, into the deep, velvet-like warmth of Lucian's bleeding palm, the vampire king felt a sudden, profound rush of pure, untainted conviction. The last remaining spark of the woman's true self, the thing the unmaking coven sought to extinguish. This was the substance of the oath. Lucian closed his eyes, his perfect features strained by the immense magical effort. He spoke the final, binding word of the oath, a term in the Tenebraic, the ancient language of the Old Blood, a word that meant both hold fast and remember. A thick, palpable wave of amethyst-colored light erupted from his hand, washing over Alara's mother, sinking deep into her skin, her eyes, her very soul. It was the infusion of his own infinite past, the magnificent, crushing weight of his immortality, pouring into the fragile vessel of her fading life. The woman gasped, a sudden, sharp intake of breath, and for a fleeting, terrifying second, her vacant eyes focused, not on Lucian, but on the terror of her own existence. Then the light subsided, leaving behind a subtle, silver wire glow tracing the veins beneath her skin, the visible signature of the Anchor. Lucian, weakened by the colossal expenditure of power, leaned slightly against the doorframe, his breath now visibly misting in the cold air. The act was done. He had bound himself, eternally, to the memory of a mortal stranger, shattering 2 centuries of perfect isolation. He looked down at Alara. "It is finished," he said, his voice husky, stripped of its resonant power. "She is anchored. She is a part of my continuity now. The rot will retreat, but the debt is now truly due. The payment is not the money, Alara. The payment is what you bring, the conflict. They will know. They will come for the Anchor." Alara, seeing the exhaustion on the face of the King of Sighs, felt a surge of loyalty, a fierce conviction that transcended fear. She did not run back to her mother. Instead, she knelt beside the still open Codex Anima, dipping her finger into the residual black-red blood on his cut palm. She pressed her crimson-tipped finger to the page just beneath the final, binding word of his oath, marking her countersignature on the contract of fate. "Then let them come, King Vane," she said, her young voice ringing with a conviction that was ancient and unyielding. "I asked for an anchor. I will be your shield." Chapter 6. The siege began before the first light of dawn could attempt to pierce the bruised sky. The immediate consequence of the anchor oath was a catastrophic rupture in the ancient wards that protected the Manor of Ash, a silent explosion of power that echoed across the hidden world. The unmaking coven knew. Lucian felt their presence like a physical pressure, a vast, malevolent cold pressing in on all sides of the manor's perimeter. He had led Ilara and her mother, now sleeping a deep, healing sleep, the silver. Light of the anchor visible beneath her closed eyelids, to the deepest sanctuary, a crypt-like space beneath the main library, reinforced by the densest, centuries-old stone. He stood alone in the grand hall, the vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadow, a single, flickering candlelight casting his tall, immobile frame in sharp, dramatic relief. His perfect marble skin was now cold with predatory intent, stripped of all melancholy. He was a king preparing for war, and this return to purpose was almost a relief. The stillness intensified, becoming the deadly calm before the storm. He wore no armor, only the severe, dark clothing of his ancient house, a statement that his flesh was the only defense he required. He held a single, magnificent weapon, a night blade, forged from meteorite iron and quenched in the blood of a fallen god, its edge an impossibly fine line of shimmering darkness. The blade did not gleam. It absorbed all light. The first sound was the shattering of the massive front doors, a single, deafening crash that echoed the violent end of 2 centuries of peace. Figures poured into the hall, not the brutish golems, but the Sunder witches, their forms skeletal, cloaked in ragged black linen, their power crackling with the chaotic, entropic energy of pure decay. They were the shock troops of the Coven, designed to strip the binding force from all things. Lucian did not move. He waited until the first 3 were halfway across the vast marble floor, their shadows stretching out like broken promises. Then he moved. The action was sparse, purposeful, and brutally final. A liquid rush, the night blade, a silent, black blur. The first witch exploded, not in blood, but in a rush of gray, dissolving ash. The second followed instantly. The third shrieked, a high, desperate sound that spoke of surprised pain, before she, too, was reduced to dust. Lucian was back in his starting position before the ashes had settled, his posture still, perfect, and terrifying. "I made an oath," Lucian's voice cut through the momentary silence, ringing with renewed, powerful conviction. "She is anchored to my eternity. You will not have her." The remaining witches hesitated, their eyes, pinpricks of destructive magic, now fixed on the sheer, overwhelming, unpredicted power of the King of Sighs. He was not the melancholic hermit of their lore. He was a tidal wave of protective fury. Lucian glanced toward the entrance of the crypt, a movement that was barely perceptible. The fight was not merely for survival, it was for the integrity of his renewed purpose. He was no longer fighting for a meaningless, ancient duty, but for the fierce, quiet hope he had seen in the eyes of a small girl who offered $50 for a king's eternal debt. He lowered his stance, the night blade poised, catching no light. His stillness was absolute, his will unyielding. "The cost of my promise is paid in full," he announced, his voice formal, cold, and utterly final. "And it is time for you to remit the interest." He surged forward, his speed defying the eye. The true siege, the high-stakes escalation of a supernatural romance rooted in duty and guilt had truly begun.